So hopefully now you've made some initial contact with some suppliers, or you're waiting to hear back from them. In this lesson, I'll show you some general guidelines on following up with those suppliers. Okay, so this video is on supplier follow-up and following up with non-responsive suppliers. And really, it's just basically a short recap of a lot of the things we've already discussed and a few other little tips. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of you who have already contacted suppliers, and hopefully you've got some great dialogue going on. And there's still going to be some of you who are kind of waiting on that, biding your time, or waiting for these suppliers to get back to you. So first off, you really want to be sure that you respond to suppliers as soon as possible. I mean, you just get the ball rolling quicker, you keep things flowing, and it's just polite. It's the same for you as for them. You want to be responded to as quickly as possible. Generally, you're going to have faster communication if you move the conversation over to Skype, or a similar type of platform. And I think I mentioned, Viber and WhatsApp, and there's a few other IM instant messaging services out there that people, especially in China, commonly use. So once you get that initial email out of the way, move over to an IM. People respond to IM messages faster on average than they do to email. And this is especially true when you're dealing with an IM service like Skype, is you need to be aware of the time differences. If it's 12 noon wherever you're at, it's probably the middle of the night if you're dealing with someone on the other side of the world. So just be aware of that, and you might have to get used to the idea that some of your work's going to be done kind of early in the morning or more in the evening, again depending on your time zone. And don't forget that if you've used Alibaba and their messaging system to initially contact any suppliers, you have to be logged into the service to receive your messages. So when you go back into Alibaba, make sure you log in and check your messages. And next, you really have to be aware that some suppliers are just slow at responding. I've had suppliers which, for whatever reason, it just took them hours or days sometimes to get back to me, and it was a little bit frustrating. And hopefully we've done a really good job at gathering suppliers. We've given ourselves as many opportunities as possible to make connections. If you've only connected with one or two suppliers and you're kind of waiting on them, you're sort of putting yourself at a disadvantage. But if you've gathered, 6 or a dozen or however many you've gathered that look good, some of them are going to be very quick to get back to you, and others are just going to be slower. And again, don't send out form emails or blanket mailouts. You're going to find you have a much lower response rate. And what I mean by form emails and blanket mailouts is just a generic letter that you sort of blast out to everyone. And on that note, and we've talked about this before, and something I always try and do, and I find that response rate is much higher, is I sort of personalize whatever email to that specific company. Now, you might be contacting a dozen different suppliers for basically what amounts to the same product, and you might do a personalization to each of them which is very similar, almost the same, but you maybe want to talk about a certain color they have or a certain packaging option they might have, just something like that to set it apart so they know it's just not some form letter that you can blast out to anyone for anything. And do send out a second email after a few days if you've gotten no response to your initial email. Now, I don't know why this is the case, but I've had this happen to me, and I've talked to other people who felt the same, is some suppliers never seem to respond to your first email. And, some people will send out that first email, get no response, and think, oh man, they're not interested in doing business with me, and give up on it. Whereas all it takes is that second email, and then they respond. I don't know why. Maybe some companies have a 2-email policy to know you're serious. I have no idea. But I do find that second email does get a pretty high response rate. Now, that being said, if a few days go by, I send a second email, a few more days go by, they still haven't responded, I generally just move on to another supplier. But hopefully, we've done a pretty good job on gathering suppliers. So we've got, a healthy choice, and we've managed to send out quite a few emails to quite a few suppliers. So some of them are going to respond instantly and you can get the ball rolling. Others might take a little bit longer, but don't discount them. And some won't respond, and we just move on to the next one. And finally, and yet again, it's so important to be professional, and I know I keep harping on that. You're just doing yourself a disservice if you're not. And just make sure you run a tight ship and you send a proper message, and you're not being loosey-goosey or incoherent. And just be very respectful, and hopefully you'll have a great relationship starting off with your new supplier.